Hello viewers, in the last episode we discussed the origins of the Second World War. In this episode we will discuss the course of the war. On September 1, 1939, Germany launched an attack with infantry, fast moving tanks and fighter planes on Poland. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war on Germany. From the east, on 17 September, Russian army invaded Poland. In a little over 1 month, Poland was divided between Germany and Russia. For 7 months, there was almost no military action. From April 1940, Hitler occupied Denmark without resistance and then Norway, Holland and Belgium quickly. By June, German army occupied Paris and took revenge for the humiliation of Versailles by forcing the French to surrender in the same railway coach in which Germany was made to surrender in 1918. The French were stunned by this defeat. Germany occupied northern part of France and established a collaborationist regime in South France with its seat at the city of Vichy. Hitler invaded Greece and Yugoslavia as well. Russia occupied the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania. Meanwhile, Italy joined Germany. At this stage, Britain stood alone. To control the 34 kilometers of the English Channel, Hitler decided to destroy the British Air Force. German fighter planes bombed British harbours, aerodromes, factories and ultimately London and the civilian population. British public refused to buckle. This became known as the Battle of Britain and lasted from June to September 1940. Unable to establish air superiority, Hitler postponed the invasion of Britain. The war in the air, however, continued with both sides bombing enemy cities. Though Stalin had honored the Nazi-Soviet pact, in June 1941, Hitler suddenly invaded Russia, leading an army which has been described as the biggest invading army in history. Reasons for this invasion are still debated by historians. German army got astonishing success. It reached within 30 kilometers of Moscow. Russia joined the side of Britain. In December, the Russian army launched a successful counter-offensive and prevented Hitler from capturing either St. Petersburg or Moscow. In the Pacific, on the morning of 7th December 1941, Japan launched the famous attack on the US naval base at Pearl Harbor in the Pacific. The US had been following a policy of isolation, though American government was assisting the British in many ways. After this attack, the US joined the war against Japan, Germany and Italy. During 1942, the Japanese expanded fast. They captured Singapore, Dutch East Indies, French Indochina, Malaya and Burma. Their fleet raided Ceylon and their planes bombarded Darwin in northern Australia. The Japanese also helped the veteran Indian leader Subhash Chandra Bose organize an offensive into India. Bose created a liberation army, the Azad Hind Force, and during the spring of 1944, this force reached the Indian frontier on the side of Burma. Thus, by the summer of 1942, the Axis powers had achieved remarkable success. In Europe, Germany created an empire extending from the North Cape in Norway to the Mediterranean Sea and the Ural Mountains to the Atlantic coast of France. The map gives an idea of this vast empire that Hitler created in Europe. The Japanese, as the other map shows, extended their sway from the Arctic fringes of North America and were knocking at the eastern frontier of the Indian Empire. It might be added that at this time Hitler took the inhuman decision to kill all Jewish people, a policy called quote unquote the final solution. Extermination camps were created where Jewish people were brought, mostly in goods trains, and mass killings were organized with scientific precision. The word Holocaust is used to denote this inhuman effort which has no parallel in human history. But the tide turned against the Axis powers much sooner than expected. Early in January 1942, Britain and the United States, the Soviet Union and 23 other countries signed a pact not to make a separate peace treaty with their enemies. Churchill called it the Grand Alliance. During the next 3 years, it achieved unconditional surrender of Italy, Germany and Japan. In June 1942, the Americans drove off a military attack on Midway Island, inflicting heavy losses. They fought some of the hardest battles of the war to capture even small islands. In November 1942, Russia began a counter attack at Stalingrad and a savage house to house battle was fought there. Russians called it the Great Patriotic War. The Battle of Stalingrad, that continued from 21st August to 2nd February 1943, is seen as the bloodiest battle in history. 1.5 million persons died on both sides. The German army in Russia was forced to surrender. In 1945, Russian army moved eastwards and occupied Warsaw, Budapest, Prague, Vienna and ultimately Berlin. The Axis powers had extended the war to Egypt and Tunisia as well. In 1943, British and American troops reached North Africa and the German army, trapped on both sides, surrendered at El Alamein in Tunisia in 1943. Yet Mussolini did not realize that his dream of an East African empire had ended. In July 1943, Italians abandoned Mussolini as well as fascism. This astonished the world. Meanwhile, American and British troops began to land in France. Eventually, 3 million troops landed on the northern coast of France. Within a few weeks, most of northern France was liberated. Thereafter, Belgium and Holland were also liberated and this army entered Germany and captured Cologne. Germans offered little resistance, yet air attacks continued and every German city was reduced to a pile of rubble. At sea, the British and American navies gradually got the better of the German submarine menace and were able to make the Atlantic and other sea lanes safe. Thus, early in 1945, Germany faced invasions from both fronts by Russian army from the east and the British and American army from the west. In February, a conference was convened at Yalta to discuss future arrangements. At this time, war had not finished. Germans were still fighting hard. As the Soviet forces entered Berlin, Hitler committed suicide on 30th April. A few days later, Germany surrendered, but the United States and Britain were still at war with Japan, while the Soviet Union was not. On 6th August 1945, a bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. The world learned of the existence of the bomb and its lethality simultaneously. On 8th August, fearing that the bomb would end the war, Stalin declared war on Japan, invaded Manchuria and annexed South Sakhalin. But Moscow was not given any role in the occupation of Japan. On 9th August 1945, a second bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. On 14th August, Japan surrendered and the bombs ensured that Japan surrendered to the United States alone. Thus, Italy, Germany and Japan were defeated and the Second World War came to an end. By the time the 50th anniversary of the end of war was observed in 1995, the world had changed. A unified Germany had come into existence, the Cold War had come to an end, and in the European Union, the victors and the defeated powers began to sit on the same table. It seemed that this war had ceased to have any significant place in the memories of nations and peoples, and that it had passed into the realm of history. But the tone and focus of ceremonies in London, Paris, Berlin, Tokyo, Rome, Washington and other cities in 1995 showed that the war was still a part of collective consciousness and of the collective identity of people concerned. The war had come to an end, yet many questions continue to reverberate. Why did over 50 million humans have to die? Why did the Germans support Hitler as they did? Could Hitler be stopped earlier? What logic was it that led to deliberate murder of some 6 million Jews, which meant that 1 in every 3 Jews in the world in 1939 was murdered? How could a rational and civilized people kill as a matter of routine? The descent to barbarism was not confined only to Germans. Inhuman atrocities were committed by all big powers. Why did Britain continue to bombard German cities even after the Germans ceased to offer resistance? The 2 bombs, the little boy and the fat man, that ended the Second World War were dropped to see how terrible they actually were. What is the spring of human behavior? Where lies the source of evil? Historians cannot give any simple verdict, nor can those who belong to other disciplines. Have we learned any lesson? Perhaps not. The enormity of destruction, it was hoped, would perhaps end wars forever. It is true that there has not been another world war and another atom or nuclear bomb has not been dropped, but not a single year has passed without a local war being fought somewhere, sometimes in many parts of the world simultaneously. The total number of victims in these wars has surpassed those who died in the Second World War. I finish the course of the war with this, and in the next episode we will discuss the consequences of the Second World War. Thank you very much.